We're live.
Hachia kokeli hoki. Hachia kokeli hoke. Thank you all for joining us today. Sahoshifoyat Aimee Roberson, Chahta micha Chikashsha Ohoyo Sia. My name is Aimee Roberson, and I am a Chahta and Chikashsha woman. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Executive Director of Cultural Survival. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the panelists and the audience who've joined us today for our webinar, Sacred Strength, Indigenous Women Rooted in Mother Earth's Wisdom. We're going to start with a bit of housekeeping. Some important things to note. We do have interpretation available in both English and Spanish. To access the interpretation, click on the world or globe icon in the bottom navigation bar of the Zoom window to choose your language. Hay interpretación disponible en inglés y español. Para acceder a la interpretación, haga clic en el icono del mundo en la barra de navegación inferior para elegir su idioma. This event is being streamed live on Cultural Survival's Facebook page and YouTube page. It is being recorded and will be posted later on www.cs.org and our YouTube page, so you can watch it again or share it for those who are unable to attend live. If you would like to support this webinar and the work of Cultural Survival, you can make a donation at cs.org/donate. So we can continue organizing these webinars. We appreciate your support. Questions and answers will take place at the end of the presentation if time permits, so please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. This webinar is organized by Cultural Survival. For those of you who are with us for the first time, we are an Indigenous-led nonprofit organization based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have been working in solidarity with Indigenous peoples to protect and defend their rights and support their self-determination, cultures, and political resilience since 1972. Cultural Survival envisions a future that respects and honors the inherent rights and dynamic cultures of Indigenous peoples, deeply and richly interwoven in lands, languages, spiritual traditions, and artistic expressions, rooted in self-determination and self-governance. We do this through a five-pronged approach: grant-making, advocacy, capacity building, Indigenous livelihoods, or Indigenous arts bazaars, and communications. Many thanks to our panelists, whose stories are featured in the latest issue of the Cultural Survival Quarterly. If you have not yet had a chance to read their stories, I invite you to do so. As Indigenous peoples, women are the hearts of our families, the backbones of our communities, and the bedrock of our movements. We honor the sacredness of women who create life, the love of women who nurture our families and traditions, the strength of women who protect and defend our homelands, and the wisdom of women who align our communities with the sacred laws of Mother Earth. Traditionally, many Indigenous peoples were matriarchal and matrilocal, with powerful women in important decision-making roles. Disrupted by colonization, our peoples were pressured to assimilate into lifeways that no longer center women, youth, and our reciprocal relationships and responsibilities to Mother Earth. This destructive trajectory of humanity is fueled by colonialism, extractivism, hyper-individualism, overconsumption, and misogyny, and has led to terrible imbalances as the sacredness of Mother Earth and her daughters has been violated and the importance of women's roles have been denied. In addition, we know that gender-based violence disproportionately affects Indigenous women, femmes, and girls, as seen in the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, with the majority being women, femmes, and girls. Thankfully, despite this oppression and extreme imbalance, Indigenous women continue to listen to the heartbeat of Mother Earth and are rooted in her wisdom as they lead the change the world needs. We've invited our panelists joining us here today to discuss the topic of today's webinar. I'm going to briefly introduce them, and then we'll jump into the discussion. Michelle Shenandoah is an inspirational speaker, writer, media creator, and member of the Onyateag, also known as Oneida, Nation Wolf Clan of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. She is the founder of the nonprofit Rematriation, dedicated to uplifting Indigenous women's voices. Raised in a family of traditional leadership, she carries the values and responsibilities of being a Haudenosaunee woman throughout her life. Her work brings about the truthful telling of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy's global influence on modern democracy and women's rights. Most recently, she released the new TV talk show, Rematriated Voices with Michelle Shenandoah, that is now streaming on PBS. Congratulations, Michelle. Also a trained lawyer and journalist, Michelle is a visionary for change. She creates space for Indigenous voices to be honored fully with light and love through her storytelling and in gathering spaces. Michelle lives in her people's homelands with her husband and her beautiful family. Yakoki, thank you for joining us, Michelle. Irene Garoës, I know I'm saying it wrong. I hope, Irene, you can pronounce it for us when we get to you. Irene brings over 10 years of experience in intersectional feminist organizing and has built community leadership and created inclusive spaces where girls, young women, and gender-diverse persons can thrive. At YFEM, she pioneered innovative programs that combine feminist leadership development with community-driven advocacy, positioning young women as powerful agents of change. She co-founded the Pride Pop-Up Expo and live music concert and serves as Namibia's country coordinator for 1 Billion Rising, leading national campaigns to end violence against women, girls, and the earth. Her work integrates Indigenous knowledge, language, art, culture, digital technology, and research to break down the barriers that silence young women and equip them to confront systemic inequalities and reshape their communities. Thanks for being with us today, Irene. Ilenia Perez, Cultural Survival's Panama Advocacy Coordinator, is from Panama, is an administrator by profession, and has a postgraduate degree in Indigenous peoples' rights. She has extensive experience in the technical and financial management of community projects in Indigenous communities, especially in Indigenous rights, biodiversity, and climate change. She has collaborated with organizations such as the Network of Indigenous Women on Biodiversity in Latin America and the Caribbean. Her work has focused on the defense of the rights of Indigenous peoples, especially women and youth, promoting the protection of biodiversity, territorial defense, the fight against climate change, and the safeguarding of ancestral knowledge. She has experience in political advocacy in local, national, and international spaces. Her passion is working with Indigenous women and youth, promoting their empowerment through transmitting ancestral knowledge and managing their territories. Thanks for contributing to this conversation, Mai, and for all the good work you're doing. Teresa Zapeta is a Mayan Indigenous woman from Guatemala with a background in social communication and public administration. She has over 25 years of experience defending the rights of women and Indigenous peoples across non-governmental organizations, government agencies, and international organizations. She served as a Guatemalan government official from 2004 to 2008 and spent 5 years at the United Nations Development Fund for Women and the UN Women Leading the Indigenous Women Program for Central America and Mexico. She's a founding member of several Indigenous women's organizations in Guatemala and Central America, and works as an independent consultant and educator on these issues. She also currently serves as executive director of the International Indigenous Women's Forum, also known as FIMI, and it's an honor to have you with us, Teresa. So we're going to jump right into our questions now. My first question is for Irene. Irene, can you please tell us about your experience as a researcher in promoting social justice and healing through participatory, feminist, and decolonial research in Gibeon with Damara and Nama women?
Thank you so much, Aimee, and thank you so much, Cultural Survival, for having me this evening here in Namibia. This research is something that was very personal for me because it has opened so many doors and places where I thought I've not healed for me personally. So the research in Gibeon, Aimee, my surname is pronounced as Garoës. It's we speak with clicks. I wanted to say that earlier on. But my experience as a researcher in Gibeon, in the south of Namibia, where mostly Nama people reside, was deeply participatory and feminist and decolonial in the approaches. What this meant is that we were centering the voices and lived experiences and knowledge systems of the Nama woman. Rather than treating the community as the subjects of research, I believe in creating spaces where women became co-creators of knowledge. And most of the knowledge was actually coming from the woman. The way we didn't want to do it in a more Western academic way, but more in a way that also encompasses the practices that we used to practice as people pre-colonial times. So we will sit around the fire and the grandmother will tell us stories, fables, transfer of oral knowledge, and what you do, what can be considered as wrong and what can be considered as good through animal stories and so on. So it was a very special moment for me because I didn't grow up having grandparents, and to have this elderly woman just embarrassing me and accepting me and so eager to tell these stories about what their great grandmothers were doing, how they were holding earth together, how the communities lived together, and how that was eventually disrupted throughout history by colonialism and apartheid was very important and a very special moment for me. And also the approach, we had to be very careful that we do not bring any power dynamics within the setting of the research so that we don't come. So we were rather just children that were listening to our elders tell us their stories, and it was so beautiful. And we were determined to be able to document this so that we do not lose out. Because most of the time we kept on talking about what are the things that we have lost, but also what are the things that we still have today, and how do we now integrate them in the world that we have, especially when it comes to healing practices. So what this basically means is that it means that we were recognizing that healing and justice are interconnected. And for many women, simply being heard, believed, and valued became part of the healing process in itself during the research. What even brought about this research, one of our objectives was there are reparation talks between Namibia and Germany about the genocide, but we realized that the woman's voice is not in the space. What are the women as the holders of memory, identity, history? People that trauma has happened to their bodies and their great grandmothers. What are their voices? What do they really want when we talk about reparation? So the experience was really very, let's decolonize how we do this. Let's have a feminist approach, and let's also see how we can see if everybody is participating in the research process in itself. Yeah, and owning it.
Thank you so much, Irene. That's really inspiring and speaks to the importance of both elders and youth and the intergenerational transfer of knowledge in our communities, as well as the importance of empowering women. Thank you so much for sharing. My next question is for Teresa. Teresa, can you tell us how FIMI worked to shift the narrative from Indigenous women being seen as subjects of aid or study to being recognized as leaders rooted in their own knowledge and authority?
Gracias, Aimee, y saludos a cada uno de ustedes que estamos en este panel y a quienes nos están siguiendo desde las distintas plataformas. Gracias por la oportunidad. Em, en realidad creo que tenemos que partir en reconocer que son muchos siglos de una narrativa que nos coloca a los pueblos indígenas y a las mujeres indígenas en una posición de desventaja y que en el día a día, con el racismo, la discriminación, tanto cotidiana, también la institucionalizada desde los gobiernos, desde las empresas, durante todos estos siglos se ha interiorizado un lenguaje, una narrativa de inferioridad, de víctimas, de beneficiarias. Es decir, nos han colocado en una posición que pareciera que no tuviéramos capacidades, experiencias, conocimientos y que somos las y los pobres, las víctimas. Entonces, ¿cómo trabajamos para poder hacer como un contrapeso a estos años de colonialismo? Nosotras desde FIMI y desde mi convicción personal, trabajo fuertemente en vernos a nosotras mismas como mujeres, como pueblos, como sujetas y sujetos de derechos. Esto es lo primero. Y las primeras que debemos de estar convencidas de ello somos nosotras mismas. De decir, ¿hay violencia en la vida? No, esto no es porque así me ha tocado, porque así es la vida, porque así es. No, esto no es permitido porque yo soy sujeta de derechos. Tengo derechos a mi territorio, tengo derecho a mis conocimientos, tengo esas capacidades. Entonces, desde FIMI hemos promovido la narrativa de la coinversión. Cuando hablamos, por ejemplo, de subvenciones, cuando hablamos con la filantropía, de la coinversión, porque partimos del hecho y de la realidad que todas las mujeres indígenas, las comunidades, contamos con conocimientos, organización, una casa comunitaria, idiomas, espiritualidad. Quizá nos falta el financiamiento, pero tenemos un bagaje de experiencia. Esto que vemos acá es arte. Ahí está la historia de nuestros pueblos. Entonces sí tenemos. Esto es lo que nosotras ponemos. ¿En qué colabora usted, señor financista, o los fondos? ¿En qué complementa? Entonces, por eso hablamos de coinversión, de complementariedad, y es una forma también de autoestima. Y ha sido interesante cuando las hermanas indígenas le decimos, em, vamos a complementar los recursos. ¿Qué es lo que usted tiene? Y ha pasado que dicen, no, es que no tenemos nada. Y cuando empezamos a hacer el inventario, se sorprenden y se emocionan y dicen, sí, uy, sí, tenemos muchas cosas, tenemos conocimientos. Entonces también partimos de recuperar el autoestima, el valor colectivo de nuestros conocimientos y de plantear la coinversión. Creo que son los dos elementos que quiero dejar como sobre la mesa. Insisto, en vernos como sujetas de derechos, reconocernos como sujetas de derechos, pelear por eso, derechos individuales y colectivos, y la coinversión para la transformación de la filantropía hacia una mirada no de beneficiarios, sino de sujetas activas y que de cambio. Y lo mismo promovemos en la investigación. Cuando nosotras hablamos de investigación, promovemos investigación comunitaria, no esas investigaciones que viene una persona externa que llega a la comunidad a extraer el conocimiento, sino entre nosotras mismas investigamos, documentamos, sistematizamos en nuestros propios idiomas. Son como las dos líneas por donde hemos venido trabajando, querida Aimee, y bueno, todas estamos invitadas a seguir fortaleciendo esta narrativa del reconocimiento y de la autonomía de nuestro ser sujetas de derechos y sujetas de cambio. Gracias, Aimee.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I really admire the work of FIMI and how you're working on really centering Indigenous women in your work globally. And I love how you talk about the narrative, how it's you are walking alongside women who are empowering themselves in their own rights and within their communities. And it's just such important work. Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was on mute. Okay. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened and not sure exactly when that happened. So anyway, thank you, Teresa, for your important work and walking alongside women who are empowering themselves and empowering their positions within their communities. I think the work of FIMI is so important. The next question is for Michelle. Michelle, could you share how the gathering spaces that you have created have also been acts of territorial restoration?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us all here together today. I think being in this space here with our sisters from around the world, I think there's some very common threads that have impacted so many of our communities. And as I look at onto the work that I've been doing for the past 10 years with Rematriation, really like led back to the work happening among my sisters and the women in our communities at home. So having really wanted to approach my life and dedicated walking into the footsteps of my ancestors, working really centered around our lands and around our territories, and looking at that from a legal perspective, it led me to the work of working with our women. And rather than working through Western law, working through our laws as Haudenosaunee people. And so we're of 6 nations that span all the way from Montreal, across upstate New York, southern Canada, out to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and some of our people are also out in Oklahoma. So we're really spread out in a vast territory when our original homelands are really mostly throughout upstate New York. And in my lifetime, having grown up with our traditional leadership, I saw so many of our clan mothers, so many of our women, my mom, my aunties, who were just so strong and centered and grounded. And when I came back from, being in higher ed, being in law school, I saw there was a silence that was happening, and it was really profound and happening across many of our communities. And so as we began to gather, centered around much of our own cultural practices and centering our beliefs and uplifting our culture, what we end up finding is that we as medicine, we as women we are our own good medicine. So when we think about our women and we think about retreat spaces and healing, it's not like we're, go off to the spa and give yourself a day where, you get a massage or something like that. But actually, when women come together, that becomes the good medicine. That is the healing. That is the strength that you get to continue to propel yourselves forward. But what we discovered was the amount of healing that had to be done. And I heard that in some of the other presenters so far, is that healing in ourselves, and then the healing in the greater collective of who we are as a people. So as we've been gathering in those spaces, what we've seen was some of our sisters who've been in that spaces, just the decision to all of a sudden decide, like, okay, that's it. I am dropping everything and I'm going to focus in on our language, because our culture is in the language, and giving everything up to want to make sure that our language is there, and then rather thinking of, you know, our languages as dying, but thinking about how can we put life back into, you know, something in, even in our own narratives, right? So shifting narratives and shifting our healing, thinking about that DNA, just as we talking about, you know, intergenerational trauma, there's also intergenerational resilience. So the connection of women and land and life are so essential. They're one. We are one, right? We are these life givers. And so as we find healing and medicine, that creates healing that happens out for our families. It creates healing out for our communities and also for the land. So it's really about recharging and reconnecting to that, you know, very, I want to say sacred connection of really inherently who we are as women, and that life giving that flows through us as human being. And we're those first teachers, we're that, you know, what, you know, some of our, you know, elders have said is, you know, we're the first environment as women. We are the first bodies that our babies learn from our heartbeat when they're in our wombs to being on our breasts, like our bodies, our voice, our language, our being. And then when we think about that on a human level, it's the same thing for us as our connection to Mother Earth. She is our environment. And so in terms of talking about, you know, territory, when we heal, right, then we get deeper into that connection of really healing with the land, or the land healing us, right? Because it really is a deeper connection. And so those are some of the elements that I think about. And, you know, so as we work to move forward, is thinking about being able to share and to shift those narratives on a bigger level for other folks to begin to understand that, because that for me is what I see as a big missing component in sort of the bigger Western society. There's a separation from human beings and nature, as if somehow we're separate, and we're not. We're one. And so as women, we are that strong voice, being so deeply connected to that life-giving element, that we can give voice to that relationship, and for all people to begin to see they can have that same type of connection and relationship to the land. So when I think about, you know, territory, you know, I think the word is restoration, right? That you is in the question. You know, it's, you know, yes, there is much happening around land back, but I almost think it's more about what's our relationship as human beings with our mother, with our greatest mother, with our actual mothers, whether they're aunties or, you know, chosen moms, our real mom. But it's really about that bigger relationship. What's that restoration with our relationship with our Mother Earth? And so, yeah.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That's really beautiful. And I love how you framed things in terms of the importance of women investing in their own healing, but not in an isolated way, in a very relational way, in community, in connection with the humans in our communities, as well as the more than humans and Mother Earth herself, and how it's all interrelated. I think that's something that we as Indigenous women carry that knowledge with us. And we are in a time right now where it's so important to reinvest in that. So thank you so much for sharing and for your work as well. My next question is for you, Mai. Mai, as a professional Guna woman, how does your spiritual and relational understanding with Mother Earth shape the way you approach your advocacy work?
Gracias, Aimee, por la pregunta. Un saludo a todas las panelistas. Realmente que agradezco mucho la oportunidad de poder compartir el panel con mujeres que hacen un excelente trabajo en diferentes espacios. Y bueno, yo creo que una de las cosas más importantes como mujer indígena profesional ha sido no perder exactamente esa relación con mi territorio, con mi identidad y con los conocimientos de mi pueblo. Y eso ha influido muchísimo en la forma en que realizo actualmente mi trabajo como coordinadora de defensa de cultura survival en Panamá. Y mucho de eso también tiene que ver de cómo he crecido viendo a mujeres indígenas lideresas profesionales y autoridades que nunca rompieron esa relación con sus comunidades y sus territorios. Mujeres que utilizaron sus conocimientos profesionales para defender los derechos de los pueblos indígenas y sobre todo pues abrir camino a otras mujeres indígenas en espacios locales, nacionales e internacionales. Y siento que crecer viendo ese trabajo también me ha enseñado que es posible formarse profesionalmente sin desconectarse totalmente de nuestras comunidades, nuestros conocimientos y nuestras luchas. Porque desde mi experiencia, si hay algo que yo he aprendido, es que uno no llega a las comunidades a enseñarles. Uno llega a las comunidades a acompañar, a escuchar y muchas veces también a aprender. Y eso influye muchísimo en el trabajo que realizo dentro de Incidencia, porque uno entiende que cada pueblo tiene sus propias luchas, sus propias formas de vida, sus dinámicas y también sus tomas de decisiones. También pues me ha permitido entender que muchas veces existe una mirada muy externa hacia los pueblos indígenas, donde se piensa que en los territorios no hay conocimiento o que las comunidades necesitan a que alguien venga a enseñarles. Pero la realidad pues es completamente distinta. Hay personas muy sabias dentro de nuestras comunidades, incluso personas que quizás no tienen títulos profesionales, pero tienen conocimientos muy profundos sobre biodiversidad, territorio, gobernanza y muchos otros conocimientos que son sumamente importantes para el cambio climático y para la actualidad en la que nos encontramos. Y también todo eso pues forma una parte importante del trabajo que realizo y es cómo transmitir temas técnicos relacionados con derechos humanos, derechos de los pueblos indígenas o incidencia política en un lenguaje sencillo y accesible para las comunidades, porque muchas veces incluso existen palabras técnicas que ni siquiera tienen traducción en nuestros propios idiomas. Entonces, uno aprende que la escucha, el respeto y el diálogo son fundamentales dentro del trabajo con comunidades. También he aprendido muchísimo de mujeres indígenas que han abierto camino antes que nosotras, mujeres indígenas profesionales que utilizaron sus conocimientos y espacios de incidencia para defender los derechos de los pueblos indígenas y para que nuestros conocimientos tradicionales fueran tomados en cuenta en espacios nacionales e internacionales. Y bueno, en mi caso, pues crecer viendo el trabajo de muchas hermanas indígenas en las comunidades a nivel nacional y dentro de la red de mujeres indígenas sobre biodiversidad también me enseñó que sí es posible usar nuestras capacidades profesionales para aportar a nuestros pueblos y seguir fortaleciendo nuestras luchas desde territorio. Y pues también quiero aprovechar que estoy compartiendo panel con Teresa Zapeta y me hace recalcar la importancia de espacios como FIMI, donde pues yo tuve la oportunidad de formar parte de la 9ª edición de la Escuela Global de Liderazgo de Mujeres Indígenas. Y estos espacios fortalecen muchísimo a mujeres indígenas para que podamos seguir ocupando espacios de toma de decisiones sin perder nuestra identidad, nuestros conocimientos o nuestra relación con las comunidades. Y pues también siento que cada vez necesitamos más mujeres indígenas en espacios de incidencia y defensa, porque cuando uno en realidad pues tiene conocimiento de base comunitaria, pues también puede dentro de ese trabajo pues fortalecer las prácticas en nuestras comunidades. Entonces, bueno, creo que es importante que cada vez se vayan fortaleciendo las capacidades de muchas mujeres indígenas. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Mai. I think I just love how you talk about being rooted in your community and the strength that that gives you and that gives all of us as Indigenous women to be rooted in our own communities, to be rooted in the local, the land, our spiritual and cultural practices. and how that really empowers us to bring that traditional knowledge and wisdom of our ancestors and our lifeways into the world, into national and international spaces. I think it's so important, and appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you so much. All right, the next question is back to Irene. In the article written for the last Cultural Survival Quarterly, you mentioned that reparative justice for Nama women must go beyond economic compensation and include the recognition of the Nama language and healing practices. What concrete forms of cultural reparation are being proposed by the women and elders of Gibeon themselves?
Yes, thank you so much, Aimee. My light is a bit dim because it's between the day and the night, but I'm just in so much of so much power and connections and interlinks that I'm seeing with other speakers, so extremely powerful. On the question, the Nama elders of Gibeon were very consistently emphasizing that reparative justice cannot only be through financial compensations or what we have nowadays, developmental projects, right? So for many people, it was also, reparations were also very cultural. It was very spiritual. It was very emotional. It must come emotionally, and it must also be very intergenerational. So they spoke about the need to restore dignity of the people, to restore the memory, the identity, and indigenous ways of living that were disrupted through the colonial violence and displacement and cultural erasure. One of the strongest proposals was the revitalization and protection of the Nama language. Many elders expressed concerns that younger generations are losing the language, which also means losing oral history, indigenous knowledge systems, songs and rituals, and ways of understanding the world in itself. Women spoke about the importance of introducing community-led language programs, intergenerational storytelling spaces, and stronger inclusion of Nama language and history within the schools and public institutions. Another important form of cultural reparation involved the recognition and preservation of indigenous healing practices. There was a story that was told about how Nama people used to, early in the morning, they will wake up and they will just go sit in the sun, and then they will take the sun in. But when the colonizers came, they were like, these people are lazy. We need to put them to work. Why are they just sitting in the sun in the morning? They need to wake up before the sun rises and already be working, So you're already disrupting something of the people. So it was important what are these healing practices that we still know, and how can we really preserve them, for the younger generations that are about to come. And elders and healers also explain that healing is not only physical, but also spiritual and communal and connected to the land, as other speakers were also talking about, and also to memory. They propose creating spaces where traditional healing knowledge can be documented, respected, and passed on safely to younger generations without stigma or dismissal. The woman also emphasized memorialization and historical recognition. This can include calls for museums and spaces and oral history archives, really how we document it. What we noticed during the research is that even in the memorial sites, it was mostly male, it was mostly men that were being memorialized, that were being celebrated as the heroes. And then we had to ask, but what about the woman? Are there stories about women that were brave, that stood up, or that carried, or that would just be, And then we were like, no. And then a lot of stories came out, one of which is also in the article about the when the people were put in the crowd to be shot, and then the woman was in labor. So it was very important that women's stories also come out, that women existed, they held, the communities at that time. Also, what was important is the land, the theme of the land, and access to ancestral spaces. So for many women, land is deeply, deeply tied to their identity and spirituality and healing and cultural continuity. So land is very important. They cannot be separated from land. And when these dispositions were placing people from areas that they have resettled at, it took away something from them. So access back to that spiritual land, to those spaces that people convened and doing their rituals is also something that was coming up strong. And yes, so the woman, what emerged was that reproductive justice is not only recovering what was materially lost, but also restoring what colonialism attempts to erase: the language, the memory, the identity, the spirituality, and then the belonging of the people.
Thank you, Irene. I really appreciate how you describe reparative justice and how multifaceted it is, and that ultimately it's about restoring dignity and the ability to heal, as well as the ability to practice our cultures in our own way, to have that self-determination, and how our cultures are, and all of these things are interwoven in our languages. So also the importance of restoring that. Thank you so much for sharing. The next question is back to Teresa. So at the Climate Change Conventions of the Convention of the Parties, or COP30, that happened last November in Belém, Brazil, FIMI co-organized a gathering of Indigenous women to craft a declaration calling climate change a crisis of rights, justice, and life. I felt very fortunate to be able to participate in that gathering and to be among such powerful Indigenous women from around the world. So I'm wondering, how does FIMI connect the defense of Mother Earth's territories with the defense of Indigenous women's bodies?
Aimee, gracias por habernos acompañado en ese importante espacio de la cumbre en el marco de la COP. Efectivamente, para quienes no conocieron de esta iniciativa, fue la primera cumbre. Nos dimos cuenta que estábamos llegando varias mujeres a la COP. Sin embargo, cada quien en su dinámica, con sus propias organizaciones o redes, y que FIMI desde su mandato de generar esta plataforma global, tratamos de organizar la cumbre para encontrarnos las mujeres indígenas y algunas aliadas y aliados. Em, el centro de esta cumbre fue el reconocimiento de nuestro rol como mujeres indígenas, protectora de los conocimientos, las mujeres indígenas que somos activas en la lucha por nuestros territorios y que sin embargo el impacto del cambio climático, de la violencia ambiental, del despojo de los territorios, está impactando de manera diferenciada en la vida de las mujeres, las jóvenes, las niñas indígenas. Em, es por ello que sí, se reconoce esta situación climática y sobre todo la violencia ambiental como una crisis de derechos humanos, tantos individuales y colectivos. En ese marco, nosotras conectamos la vida de nuestros territorios, de la Madre Tierra, en sus propias dimensiones, en la dimensión de la vida de la Madre Tierra tiene su propia energía desde nuestra cosmovisión, desde nuestra espiritualidad, porque los territorios estamos hablando de todos los elementos, no estamos hablando solo de la tierra, estamos hablando del agua, de los animales, de la biodiversidad, del aire, etcétera. Y cuando hablamos de la vida de las mujeres indígenas y nuestros cuerpos, que nuestra vida no se limita solo al cuerpo físicamente, sino que las mujeres indígenas también somos un universo en sí mismo. Somos energía, somos materia, somos espiritualidad, somos conocimiento. Entonces es otra dimensión que a mi criterio tenemos que darle a cada uno la dimensión que le corresponde y su propia energía, a la madre tierra y a la vida integral nuestra, incluido nuestro cuerpo y nuestra energía. En ese sentido, ¿por qué es importante vincular estas dos dimensiones o estas energías? Primero, como lo expliqué al inicio, el impacto de toda esta crisis global en la vida cotidiana es mucho más fuerte. más aún cuando hablamos de mujeres indígenas que se encuentran en condiciones mayores de desigualdad en las comunidades. No todas las comunidades y las mujeres tienen acceso a la tierra. No todas tienen posibilidades de cultivar sus propios alimentos. Sin embargo, las mujeres que están en primera línea en las comunidades luchando por estos derechos se ven mucho más vulneradas que quienes estamos teniendo otro tipo de oportunidades. Entonces, por eso es importante vincular ambas luchas porque sí está haciendo un impacto fuerte en la vida cotidiana, en la salud. Hay, por ejemplo, estudios que ha realizado City, que en conjunto con FIMI hemos promovido un congreso sobre la violencia ambiental, donde se demuestra que los químicos y todos estos materiales y en las industrias extractivas dañan la salud reproductiva de las mujeres. Incluso hay niños, niñas que ya están naciendo con la salud, el derecho a la salud limitado por estas situaciones. Y lo mismo podríamos hablar en los procesos violentos de desalojo, de despojo que sucede mucho en Guatemala. En esos procesos, muchas niñas, muchas adolescentes están siendo violadas sexualmente. Así hay varios elementos que podríamos traer a la mesa en ese abanico de las violencias, del racismo, etcétera, que vienen a limitar ese pleno ejercicio de los derechos de las mujeres, de las niñas, de los jóvenes. Entonces, nosotras desde FIMI tratamos de promover este vínculo entre ambas luchas, porque estas dos dimensiones de nuestras luchas están así entrelazadas en nuestra vida cotidiana. Y desde FIMI tratamos de colaborar acompañando con algo de recursos, haciendo subvenciones, investigación comunitaria, formación, como lo mencionó Mike, que me alegra tanto que haya pasado por la escuela y que haya complementado su experiencia y sus conocimientos. También hacemos incidencia, en fin, pero la columna vertebral de nuestra agenda somos las mujeres, las jóvenes, las niñas y nuestros territorios y nuestro derecho a la autodeterminación. Gracias, Aimee.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Really powerful words and powerful work. My next question is for Michelle. You mentioned in your article that clan mother Mama Bear says, "We're not feminists, we're the law." What a powerful statement.
Mhm.
How do Haudenosaunee women understand their role as carriers of an original authority that has always existed?
Well, it's just that. It's actually like, it's sometimes when something is, it's hard to put it into words except to say that it exists. And and I think that Mama Bear's words, that quote that we're not feminists, we're the law is, in such a great way to express that. And that actually came from a panel that she was on in New York City with a really good friend and scholar who was an ally who passed last summer. Her name was Sally Roche Wagner, who was a leading authority on, suffrage and also wrote a lot about Haudenosaunee influence on women suffragists and also Gloria Steinem. So the three of them were on the panel and talking about feminism. And I think what Mama Bear was really also getting to was that, we as Haudenosaunee and Indigenous peoples around the world, we predate feminism. And so when you really look to, what were the laws that, or what have been the laws, I should say, that continue to guide our people. And that, for Haudenosaunee people is the role of our women. And, there's a place for everybody within, our societies, within our governance, but sort of really at the core is life. And, going back to what I shared earlier about women as life givers and having that connection, to our earth, but also our cosmologies, which, we come from, sky world in the stars. And, as a woman that first brought, life here for us, to become human beings, came through a woman. And so there's so many aspects throughout our history that really centers women, and learning from from the world that we live in, and just really letting that also be how we guide ourselves and govern ourselves. And so much of that centers life and women. And so within our societies, women were always safe, right? That was a place where, you could be safe. When we became the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, we're guided through our matrilineal way of life, where you gain your mother's nation, you gain her clan, you are named through the clan of your matriline. And so, with that understanding, that is our worldview, that, what she's saying, that we're not feminists, we're the law. We didn't have to push back on those constructs of patriarchy until we've met with colonization, right? And so, being able to take a look at, what is that continuity of who we are, and how does it express itself into today, and for people to understand that, there is something different. We're not all the same in terms of how we, interact in society, but there are other ways of existing, which is we can be from matrilineal cultures. And so, I talked about, the first environment of women, the seeds that are within us, that we continue to cultivate, our food and our language and our babies. And so, understanding that there's this thread of DNA. One thing that also is pointed to is that, even the cells within our body, when we look at the mitochondrial DNA, which is the firehouse of our cellular structure, that's also something that you gain from your mother. You can only gain it from your mother. You don't receive it from your father. And so, when we look at what fuels our life, what gives us the life force to be here, it comes through the mother. It comes from Mother Earth. And for us, it comes through the cosmologies also of who we are as people. So within the structure of our society, it really is the women who have the say over the land, over the children, whether or not we're going to go to war or whether or not we're going to be at peace. That's a decision that is made by the women from within our nations. It's not from the men. And a lot of it has to do with, how we tend to and care for our families, because women are going to sort of really think through the matters. And do I want to send my children off to, they could potentially lose their lives, versus being quick to react and want to, show dominance or force. And so, when you look at those processes, those decision making, processes, and why they exist, when we're talking about not being feminist, pushing against something, but just being the law that is inherent, there's an inherent authority with being a woman. Right. And so that's really what, she was really speaking of. When you contrast that also to, Western, culture, when, it historically had, women not being able to make decisions over their children, or even have a right to their own children. That's just like inconceivable, within, the structure from which, Haudenosaunee people, come from, because the women and the children and the land, and, we're like one, right? And so I also want to just say, like, I really appreciate what Irene shared about, misunderstandings and misconceptions, with the women being in the sun in the morning, and another culture not understanding, what was happening, and, and then calling, people lazy. And I just want to share like a little story that, even among the Haudenosaunee, that, we had, people in time who were, outsiders, who were settlers in our land, who, saw that the women were the ones who were tending to, our agriculture, to overseeing the seeds and the planting and the cultivation of that, and saw the men, not doing that, and thought that, men were being, lazy. And in order to acculturate them, to, you know, help and to bring them up to speed, was to put the men, you know, out into the fields and planting, and then to bring the women, you know, in the house, you know, in the houses. And that, you know, force, that act of force and, you know, law, so to speak, an imposition of outside law, created something that was very devastating, because it is our grandmothers and our mothers and our women and who continue to cultivate the seeds, to, you know, grow our foods and the seeds within our bodies. Like, there's that deep connection again that flows through the women and the land and that regeneration. And so, you know, I just wanted to be able to share that you know, that change and that imposition of law or lifestyle and misunderstanding, I think, you know, is something where we really have to be able to think about how we move forward, in the sense of, you know, the greater society, you know, that, you know, we all sort of exist within, is the understanding of the importance of culture and how that expresses itself in relation to the people and the land, because it will vary depending on where you're located in the world, and understanding that those laws are really indigenous and tied to the land, and those really need to be the laws to prevail, because it's in relation to the water that has always flowed through those lands, or the foods that have always grown from there. So, and so really, like, looking to the, you know, the women, to the people indigenous from those lands, will really help to shape what laws really should prevail in that area of the world.
Yes, thank you so much, Michelle. Thanks for sharing these powerful insights. I want to invite you to go a little deeper into this idea too. You've highlighted that Indigenous traditional knowledge, especially women's knowledge, present in songs, medicines, and daily practices, are essential to facing the climate crisis. Could you provide some concrete examples of putting that into practice?
Sí, gracias, Aimee, por la pregunta. Yo creo que siempre es importante reconocer que nuestros conocimientos indígenas siguen siendo muy importantes hasta el día de hoy, especialmente frente a temas e impactos como el cambio climático, porque muchos de esos conocimientos todavía continúan practicándose dentro de nuestras comunidades y tienen un papel importante en procesos de mitigación y adaptación al cambio climático. Y algo importante es que muchos de nuestros sabios históricamente pues ya hablaban sobre cambios en el ambiente, cambios en el mar, en el viento, en las lluvias o incluso en los comportamientos de las aves y otros animales. Entonces, de cierta manera, estos temas relacionados con cambios en la naturaleza no son completamente nuevos para muchos de nuestros pueblos, porque han sido parte de procesos de observación y convivencia con la Madre Tierra durante generaciones. Y algo importante, pues, para mí ha sido escuchar y aprender directamente de sabios y autoridades conocedoras de nuestros pueblos. Y gracias a ese trabajo y al intercambio con sabios y sabias, pues, he podido entender que muchos de estos conocimientos siguen vivos y que existen con un cuidado profundo hacia la naturaleza, hacia la madre tierra, aún dentro de nuestras prácticas. Y un ejemplo sería que muchas mujeres todavía conservan conocimientos sobre plantas medicinales, sobre cómo prepararlas, cómo recolectarlas o cómo utilizarlas sin afectar los recursos naturales dentro del territorio. También muchas comunidades continúan practicando formas de agricultura tradicional y sostenible y siguen ciclos de la naturaleza y observando cambios en el clima y el ecosistema. Incluso existen prácticas relacionadas con la preparación de abonos naturales, utilizando restos orgánicos y procesos de fermentación natural para fortalecer la tierra sin necesidad de químicos externos. También pues existen conocimientos basados en la observación de aves y cambios en la naturaleza que de una u otra manera pues ayudan a orientar las actividades agrícolas y comunitarias. Y todo y todo esto, pues, hay una enseñanza muy importante frente al cambio climático porque son conocimientos que no nacen de años de estudios, sino de una convivencia de manera natural, la observación y el respeto hacia la Madre Tierra. Y dentro de todo esto, pues las mujeres indígenas tienen un papel sumamente importante porque muchas veces somos las que sostenemos y transmitimos estos conocimientos relacionados con medicina tradicional, semilla, alimentación y algo muy importante que tenemos nosotras las mujeres indígenas es el cuidado comunitario y también ese traspaso de nuestras lenguas indígenas a las futuras generaciones, porque dentro de las lenguas indígenas pues está el conocimiento, este conocimiento que heredamos de nuestros ancianos, de nuestros abuelos, entonces que se sigue transmitiendo gracias al traspaso de las lenguas indígenas. Y pues siento que muchas veces estos conocimientos todavía no han sido suficientemente valorados, a pesar de que tienen mucho que aportar, no solamente en comunidades, sino también en las discusiones actuales sobre biodiversidad, cambio climático y otros temas importantes.
Thank you so much, Mai, for helping to highlight the richness and wisdom of our cultures. Thank you so much. The next question is for Irene. Irene, you have used poetry to describe the body of Nama women as a site of bravery, memory, and resistance. How do you connect that image of the female body with the idea of Mother Earth as a sacred territory that has also been colonized and dispossessed?
Thank you so much, Aimee. Thank you so much for this very delicious question. I love this question. So the body of Nama woman or just woman in generally and the Mother Earth are very deeply interconnected, but also the same. It's one for me because both carry histories of memory, violence, survival, and resistance. So I use poetry in this article to explore these connections because poetry allows us to speak about pain, about spirituality, and in healing ways that other conventional aspects, maybe such as academic languages, will not be able to articulate clearly. So the bodies of Nama women have historically been seen as sites where colonialism, patriarchy, and violence were enacted through displacement, exploitation, sexual violence, silencing, and the control of indigenous identities and knowledge systems. Cultural knowledge and strength of survival across generations, from generations to generations. So when I speak about the female body as a site of bravery and resistance, I'm acknowledging both the wounds, the pains, but also the power that it holds and holds within itself. So I connect this to Mother Earth because colonization of indigenous land and the control of indigenous women often happen together at the same time. So when land was treated as something that can be conquered, extracted from, something that can be owned, where it was not really owned, people lived with the land, you know. So just as indigenous bodies were objectified and controlled, the same thing happened to the land, you know, and both things gives us life, as Michelle was saying. So communities were separated from ancestral lands, sacred spaces, water sources, medicinal plants and herbs, and cultural practices connected to the land, connected to the environment. So this created not only economic disposition, but also spiritual and emotional rapture that happened to the people. So the same thing that was happening to the land was also happening to the bodies, and especially to the bodies of the women. So as I said earlier on, the relationship to land is not separate from identity and healing and ancestry and what we hold. So Mother Earth is understood as a living, sacred, and relational place that we all come from, that we are all giving life and is giving us life. So she holds memory in the same way our bodies hold memory. The land remembers displacement, violence, and loss, but it also remembers ceremony and healing and belonging and ritual and singing. So what I try to do through poetry is to try to reclaim both the female body, but also the land from narratives that only define them through suffering. We are also powerful in that way. So after colonization, both still the Mother Earth and the bodies of women still continue to nurture life. They still continue to preserve memory and call back people to healing and reconnection. I think especially nowadays, and it's something that Indigenous communities have been doing for years and years, calling us all back. Let's go back. Let's go back to the place that has been giving us life, to the ways we have been doing things. And I think this call is so much stronger nowadays with what we can see with the masculine aggression in the world, with fascism and the wars and extraction and just a lot of things that are happening. So we are being all called back to that place where life comes from. We are being all called back to that feminine energy where we can be really build communities and be in solidarity and connect with the people and but also with Mother Earth. Thank you.
Beautiful, Irene. Thank you for your delicious answer to this question. I really appreciate that. The next question is for Teresa. Over 25 years, FIMI has built bridges between elders and young women leaders across different regions around the world. What role does that intergenerational weaving play in sustaining not just FIMI, but any women's movement?
Creo que el trabajo constante de estar conscientes que nuestros procesos y nuestros movimientos no son de adultas, creo que es importante porque a veces las que ya hemos caminado un poco necesitamos de vez en cuando parar y tomar conciencia que somos una comunidad y en la comunidad estamos todas y todos con las distintas edades, condiciones, jóvenes, adultas, niños, ancianos, hombres, mujeres, comunidad de la diversidad, personas con discapacidad, etcétera. Entonces, desde FIMI tratamos en nuestros procesos estar constantemente pendientes y es uno de los criterios que aplicamos internamente para conformar nuestros procesos de encuentros o para priorizar subvenciones o participaciones en nuestros procesos de formación, el criterio del balance geográfico, balance de edad, balance de participación de pueblos, porque en cada país hay distintos pueblos y algunos pueblos son más activos en las participaciones que otras y por supuesto la juventud. Entonces, esto es un criterio importante en FIMI, tratamos de aplicarlo y tratamos de invertir en ello porque la diversidad, el balance también implica invertir recursos, estar dispuestos a invertir en ello, en los diálogos, en los encuentros. Esto por el lado de FIMI. También en mi trabajo de activista a nivel de mi país, en Guatemala, soy parte de iniciativas donde estamos tratando de volver a nuestras propias metodologías de los diálogos intergeneracionales. Por ejemplo, en muchos de nuestros casos de mi generación, no tuvimos oportunidades de asistir como a muchos talleres, encuentros como ahora, que les llamamos encuentros de diálogo intergeneracional. Nosotras aprendimos esta convivencia intergeneracional y este traslado de conocimientos, de sabiduría, de aprendizaje de nuestros mayores en la cotidianidad. Entonces, esa metodología la estamos tratando de recuperar, es decir, en la familia, alrededor de una comida, alrededor del fuego, de una ceremonia, de la siembra. Ahora hay mucha juventud que están en las áreas urbanas, entonces quizá ya no tienen esos contactos o esos mecanismos que nosotros pudimos tener en el campo. Pero entonces se trata de buscar que esa metodología vuelva a nuestros hogares, a nuestras familias, a nuestras comunidades, tanto urbanas como rurales, en donde alrededor de una comida, de una conversación, de un juego, de alrededor de una tarea que hay que realizar, podamos hacer esta transmisión de conocimientos desde los mayores hasta los más chicos. Creo que nos hemos estado equivocando a veces cuando tratamos de llevar el diálogo intergeneracional únicamente a través de un panel, que le llamamos diálogo intergeneracional. Hay un adulto o tres adultos y uno o dos jóvenes conversando. La apuesta es volver a traer nuestras metodologías propias para realmente hacer sostenible estos diálogos y esta transmisión intergeneracional. Es muy relevante para la sostenibilidad de las luchas, de los movimientos, la sostenibilidad de las comunidades y de la sostenibilidad de todo nuestro tejido social como pueblos en los distintos nacionalidades, regiones en que nos encontremos. Entonces, yo quiero motivarles, invitarles a que desde casa, desde el hogar, desde la comunidad, desde los espacios de trabajo, tratemos de traer esas metodologías propias para hacer posible esta transmisión de conocimiento, esta convivencia, alrededor de todo lo que nos han compartido Irene, Mai, que nos han compartido en cuanto a conocimientos, en cuanto a luchas, en cuanto a derechos. Es importante llevarlos hasta la profundidad de cada hogar, cada familia, cada comunidad. Gracias. Bueno, esas son como las dos líneas por donde yo estoy transitando ahora, tanto desde FIMI como desde mi trabajo voluntario que hago en mi país con algunas hermanas. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for these important ideas that we can all implement. It's very important work. Michelle, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy has maintained peace for 1,000 years through Indigenous principles. At this critical time for humanity, which specific aspects of that governance wisdom, centered on women and on Mother Earth, can you offer as part of the solution?
So I don't know if there's one simple answer, and maybe there is actually, and it might have a lot to do with what we value and how we think as humankind. And I think that might actually be part of the solution is humankind, right? Recognizing as human beings how we have to conduct ourselves in the world and working together. And so I just want to point to, that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy governance, was also seen as a solution to the United States founding fathers and their drafting of the Constitution. And they saw that as a solution to be able to bring the representation of many voices together, and do so with peace and with equity and democracy to be able to give voice to all people. But it was interesting because even still, they left out the voice of pretty much everyone except for white landowning men. And so women were left out, all people of color were left out, the natural world of, the waters and, the animals and the wind, which are all accounted for and acknowledged in so many Indigenous lifeways, that those were not even a thought. And so looking, to those principles that were, of the original roots of, modern democracy, going back to those original principles and thinking about life, putting life at the center, right? So let's first think about the next 7 generations. That's always included in Haudenosaunee decision making and thinking, and also within other indigenous cultures is thinking about future generations, those that we won't even be walking this planet with, because we'll have already been gone. But thinking about what are we leaving for them, because they will know us by the quality of the air that they breathe, by whether or not they have seeds that they can plant and reproduce in soil that is clean, and having clean water to drink, right? Like all of those things are going to matter, and they're going to be based on the decisions that we make today. And so actually there's one of our faith keepers, Oren Lyons, which many of you may know here on the line, who has done a considerable amount with the United Nations, and bringing Indigenous representation to the UN. And, he said we're at a time now where, it really it comes down to 4 words. Like we all have to get up and fight. And he says it comes down to 4 words, which is value change for survival. And it becomes a responsibility that we all have. And as Haudenosaunee, we don't talk about our rights. We don't have a right to water. We don't have a right to clean air. It's a responsibility that we have in our lives, that we have to be responsible to the water. The water is this living being that helps us to be alive. So not only do we have to acknowledge the water and be grateful and thankful because the water feels our gratitude, but it makes us more mindful about how we are in relationship with the water, but also for the future generations, right? And so when we think about that with all of life, that becomes our responsibility as humans. So if we can shift our thinking from rights to responsibilities, how is it that I'm responsible for taking care of, the space here with each of you, and being kind and careful, and hearing your words and taking them into consideration, and in terms of how I conduct my life, right? And really just helping to nurture that space of, like, again, coming back to kindness, humankind, right? There's a word in there that I think becomes essential, that we really need to center, the responsibility that we have as human beings. And because we haven't, and when I say we, I just mean sort of more as like a global collective in terms of the recognition of where we're at today, when I'm saying like we haven't. But there's been so many Indigenous people who have been working to raise the knowledge and the principles and the actions that are essential so that we can ensure that life continues. And so I just feel like that responsibility is so important. And I want to just also uplift another book that just came out, called American Indigenous Democracy: A Call for Interdependence. And that book really kind of talks a lot about what I'm sharing now from many Haudenosaunee elders and leaders. And in addition to that, I saw in the chat there that someone shared the link to Rematriated Voices. And that's another space where it's about just really uplifting so much of our elders and leaders who are sharing the same message. And so it really is about balance and centering, putting life at the center of our decisions, not ourselves, but life at the center. So yes, thank you so much, Aimee.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for sharing this wisdom from your ancestors, your elders, and your culture. Thanks for carrying that forward. I have another question for you. Growing up between different worlds as an Indigenous woman can be difficult, as you expressed in your article, and many of us know. What would be your message about how ancestral identity and sacred connection to Mother Earth can be a source of strength, even when you're far from your territory or your homelands?
Gracias, Aimee. Yo creo que esta pregunta es muy importante hoy, especialmente porque cada vez más jóvenes indígenas pues están migrando a la ciudad, ya sea para estudiar, trabajar o buscar nuevas oportunidades. Y muchas veces en ese proceso pues enfrentan una desconexión fuerte con nuestros territorios, nuestros idiomas, las costumbres sobre todo, e incluso con nuestra propia identidad. Entonces yo creo que ahí hay muchas veces existe una presión de adaptarse o incluso de sentir que para crecer profesionalmente uno tiene que dejar atrás parte de quién es. Eh, yo con el tiempo pues he entendido que mi identidad indígena nunca ha sido una debilidad, más que todo para mí ha sido una fortaleza y hay algo muy importante y es que tenemos que entender que crecer profesionalmente no tiene que significar desconectarse totalmente de nuestros territorios, de nuestros idiomas o sobre todo de nuestros conocimientos. Al contrario, mientras más espacios ocupamos, más importante es mantener esa relación viva con nuestras comunidades porque al final nuestra identidad también influye en cómo entendemos el liderazgo, el trabajo comunitario, la defensa y nuestra relación con los territorios. Y aunque muchas veces pues no podemos estar físicamente y estamos lejos, nos encontramos lejos de nuestras comunidades, eso no significa estar desconectadas. Yo siempre trato de mantener esa relación escuchando a las comunidades, regresando a los territorios, aprendiendo de nuestros mayores y entendiendo que todavía hay mucho conocimiento de nuestras comunidades que debemos seguir valorando y fortaleciendo. También hoy hay más mujeres indígenas que están llegando a espacios internacionales, académicos y de toma de decisiones y eso es muy importante porque siento que el reto no solamente es llegar a esos espacios, sino también pues cómo llegamos y para qué llegamos, porque nuestros conocimientos, nuestros idiomas y nuestras formas de entender la vida pues también tienen un valor y tienen también que estar presentes dentro de esos espacios. Y por eso pues creo que es muy importante que más mujeres indígenas continúen preparándose, pero sobre todo sin perder esa relación, esa conexión con nuestro territorio, creo que es sumamente importante. Gracias.
Yes, Mai, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your experience. It's very inspiring. Well, I'm not sure. We're running out of time. It's gone by so fast. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your contributions. This has been a really rich discussion, and I know there's been a lot of appreciation in the chat as well. But before we wrap up our time together, I do want to let you all know that Cultural Survival recently launched a new podcast. So in addition to these webinars that we do, we have a new podcast called Mother Earth Medicine, an ancestral intelligence podcast to heal our future. In this podcast, we aim to honor Indigenous cultures and values as we collectively dream and work toward a flourishing future for all, because ancestral intelligence embodies the antidote to the extractive ideologies destroying our planet. And I think we've heard from all of the panelists today really confirming the ways that is true for us as Indigenous peoples and for allies and other peoples as well. Mother Earth Medicine is co-hosted by Cultural Survival Board member Dr. Lila June Johnston, as well as myself, in dialogue with Indigenous leaders, knowledge keepers, and allies about Indigenous issues around the world. So please check out the podcast on your favorite streaming platform and join us in exploring how to address our world's greatest challenges, centering traditional knowledge and values that promote sustainable and regenerative lifeways in right relationship with Mother Earth. As you've also heard during today's webinar, Indigenous peoples are revitalizing traditional knowledge, rekindling kinship and trade routes, and building movements and networks for social change and mutual aid. We hope to inspire our listeners to reconnect with their own Indigenous roots from wherever their ancestors hail and tap into the sustainable lifeways that are still or once were practiced the world over. So I'm inviting you to join us on a journey of solidarity as we highlight peoples and nations who never forgot their ways of life and who fight on the front lines every day to protect their communities, languages, cultures, and territories. If you enjoy our content through webinars, Indigenous Rights Radio, or the New Mother Earth Medicine podcast, we invite you to visit our website, www.cs.org, and make a donation. If you can, every donation counts no matter the size, and your donation will go a long way to ensure that Indigenous voices across the planet, across Mother Earth, are heard and actions are taken to protect their rights and territories along with the future of Mother Earth. So I'm sorry we don't have time for questions, but once again, want to thank all our wonderful panelists. I'm walking away feeling super inspired, and I know all the audience is too, as we've seen in the chat. I wish we were, once again, I wish we were all around a fire together with the audience as well, so that we could be in person, but also grateful that we have this technology so that we can connect from all the different places in the world that we're joining from today. So yeah, koki hoki, thank you all so, so much for being with us, for contributing to the magazine and this webinar and all of the just incredible work that you're doing. It's so important, not only for you and your communities, but for the whole world to be seeing the examples that you're setting, to be inspired by your work and your colleagues' work at this time for humanity. So I just appreciate you all and look forward to the next time we get to meet, hopefully in person. Thank you all so much. And thanks to the audience as well for tuning in. Have a great day. Hachi pinsa la chiki. We'll see you